He was known only as Darius, a quiet, sharp-eyed enslaved man who moved through the Louisiana night like a shadow, obedient on the surface, burning underneath. For 10 long years, he endured what no man should ever face: domination, violation, humiliation inflicted by 5 powerful masters who believed themselves untouchable. But rage has a temperature. And on one suffocating summer night in 1858, Darius crossed the line between survival and reckoning. By dawn, one master was found mutilated in a locked barn. 2 more would fall before the week ended. And by the 7th night, the entire parish trembled as whispers spread that one man armed with nothing but a stolen knife and a decade of buried fury had turned the world of slaveholding elites upside down. This isn't a tale of madness. This is a tale of calculation, a tale of a man who refused to die quietly, a tale of justice carved into history with steel. And the question that will haunt you is simple: what finally pushes a man past the point of fear? Before we dive deeper, if stories of resistance, forbidden history, and untold human courage matter to you, tap the like button. It tells YouTube this story deserves to be heard. And hey, if you want more cinematic deep dives like this, consider subscribing. You won't want to miss what's coming. Drop your thoughts as we go. This channel thrives on the conversations we build together. The night pressed against the cabin walls as Marcus breathed slow, steady breaths, feeling the weight of years settle on his shoulders like wet cloth, heavy enough to bend any ordinary man. He wasn't ordinary anymore. Not after a decade of watching 5 masters carve their cruelty across every hour of his life, leaving silence where dignity once lived, leaving fire where fear once ruled. Marcus learned early that survival required shrinking himself, folding his emotions small, hiding them beneath obedience, because men who showed anger on the plantation rarely saw another sunrise. But every sunrise still found him standing, carrying tools, splitting logs, and bowing his head, letting their insults slide across him like dull iron instead of sinking deep. His strength came not from muscle, though he had plenty, but from endurance, from the quiet decision each morning that he would outlast the men who believed they owned him. He moved through days like a man wading through swamp water, slow on the surface, but beneath, currents of memory and rage twisted through him with relentless, patient purpose. Every master had taken something from him, something invisible to the eye: dignity, choice, rest, moments of quiet. Pieces of Marcus chipped away until only resolve remained. The men called him steady, mocking the calm they mistook for stupidity, failing to see the calculation behind his silence, failing to imagine the storm gathering inside him. He spent nights alone with thoughts sharp enough to slice through steel, rehearsing moments he never spoke aloud, imagining futures where he stood tall without chains. The other enslaved men sensed something shifting in him, though none asked, each carrying their own battles, each understanding that change often brewed quietly before erupting. Marcus sharpened his awareness long before he ever sharpened a blade, watching patterns, memorizing roots, noting weaknesses in men who believed they possessed none. He knew which doors creaked, which floors groaned, which windows stuck, and which locks were decorations rather than barriers against a determined mind. Even the guards overlooked him, assuming strength without ambition, focusing instead on others who shouted resistance rather than the one who whispered it internally. His hands bore calluses from labor, but his mind held sharper edges, honed by years of insults thrown at him like stones until they hardened him completely. He walked with downcast eyes, not from submission but to hide the way his gaze mapped every detail, collecting information like raindrops filling a bucket. Some nights he lay awake listening to the distant footsteps of the masters, each thud a reminder of the imbalance built into every corner of the estate. In these moments, Marcus imagined pulling away the foundation of their arrogance, imagined them feeling even a fraction of the helplessness they casually inflicted. Yet he never allowed anger to guide him recklessly. He studied it like a dangerous tool, one that required patience, not sudden, uncontrolled swings. His plan didn't begin with violence. It began with the understanding that to change his world, he must move smarter, quieter, and far more deliberately. Each day, he stored away details, like the way Master Rowan clutched his cane when tired, or how Master Hale drank himself into vulnerability every Friday night. He noticed how Master Brant left doors unlocked when distracted, and how Master Cohen strutted like a man convinced fate itself bowed to him. Master Darren, the youngest, carried cruelty like perfume, a constant presence, unaware that his predictability made him the easiest to read. Marcus took no joy in observing them, no satisfaction in plotting change. Only a grim necessity drove him, a force rising from years of crushed humanity. He smiled when needed, nodded when expected, kept his shoulders low and his voice even, blending into the background like another tool waiting to be used. The masters never imagined a man could watch them so closely without admiration or fear, misreading his quiet as emptiness rather than coiled strength. By the time summer rolled through Louisiana with its suffocating heat, Marcus already knew what he would do, though he hadn't yet allowed himself to admit it. His resolve strengthened when he saw another enslaved man punished brutally for a mistake he didn't make, a beating delivered casually, as though pain were routine. Something inside Marcus clenched then tight, irrevocable, not a flare of rage but a locked decision that the world would not continue unchanged. He stared at the five masters from a distance, seeing not their wealth or power, but their weaknesses, their blind spots, their arrogance that blinded them. The moment arrived quietly, without drama, when Marcus realized he was done bending, done shrinking, done letting men define his worth with their cruelty. As night settled thick and humid over the fields, he stepped into the shadows with a calm heart and steady breath, ready to walk toward the storm he'd become. Marcus stepped into the first night with a breath so controlled it felt mechanical, carrying no fear, only a cold readiness sharpened through years of surviving men who mistook cruelty for authority. He moved beneath the tree line where shadows cooled the humid air, each step deliberate, each sound evaluated, his senses stretched thin enough to recognize distant movement before it threatened him. Master Hawley's cabin glowed faintly from lamplight, the drunken man inside pacing unevenly, muttering to himself about debts, cotton yields, and punishments he planned for dawn. Marcus waited, timing his breath with Hawley's staggered steps, remembering the night's hail forced him to kneel, forced him to endure humiliation disguised as discipline, carving invisible scars beneath his ribs. He slipped inside through the broken rear shutter hail never repaired, knowing the man believed locks unnecessary around property trained to fear him more than escape. The room smelled of stale liquor and sweat, heavy enough to cling to the tongue. Marcus held still, letting the silence settle until Hawley's drunken eyes finally glazed. When Hale leaned across his desk to refill his cup, Marcus closed the distance, strong hands covering the man's mouth while driving him backward onto the floor. The struggle was brief, dulled by Hawley's intoxication, but rage burned thick beneath Marcus's calm as he bound the man's wrists with rope taken from the stables. He spoke no words, letting silence deliver more terror than threats, because Hale understood instantly this wasn't rebellion, it was judgment, a reckoning delivered by hands he once owned. Marcus moved with a precision honed by years of memorizing anatomy through medical scraps left behind by careless plantation doctors who underestimated enslaved intelligence entirely. When Hale stopped breathing, Marcus cleaned the small blade against the man's discarded shirt, studying the still body only long enough to confirm the finality he required. He disappeared into the night before footsteps stirred elsewhere, the darkness swallowing him like a familiar companion guiding him toward the second name carved into his memory. Master Rowan lived closest to the fields, patrolling them obsessively each night, convinced men in chains waited to ambush him despite years of unquestioned submission. Marcus tracked him from a distance, watching the lantern swing from Rowan's hand, each sway revealing how little balance remained in his aging legs. Rowan paused often to curse at shrubs and crickets, turning his paranoia into routine, never realizing the man he feared most walked quietly 10 steps behind him. Marcus waited until Rowan rested on a fallen log, stretching his sore back, muttering about the endless burden of managing men who should know their place. He approached through tall grass, blade down at his side, footsteps swallowed by the rustle of wind that masked every sound he made. Rowan reached for his pistol too late, trembling hands fumbling at the handle, eyes widening as he recognized the man he assumed lacked the courage to challenge him. A single kick disarmed him, a single shove pinned him, rope secured him, and the cold clarity in Marcus's eyes silenced every attempt at negotiation. This death unfolded cleaner, quieter, Rowan's final breath leaving him almost peacefully, unaware of how thoroughly his authority had dissolved beneath the weight of his own arrogance. Marcus moved on before fear rippled through the estate, retracing routes he'd practiced mentally every night for years, knowing precisely which shadows granted safe passage. Master Brant's estate sat across a swampy strip of land, his arrogance keeping him from reinforcing the warped door leading to the kitchen corridor Marcus once cleaned daily. He entered unseen, slipping past shelves of dried herbs and tools, making no more noise than the settling of the old boards beneath his bare feet. Brant slept heavily after evening brandy, sprawled across his bed like a king awaiting tribute, unaware that tribute had transformed into consequence. Marcus stood over him for a long moment, remembering the beatings Brant delivered not out of necessity but pleasure, each strike meant to remind Marcus of his supposed inferiority. The blade flashed quickly, efficiently, as Marcus refused to grant Brant the dignity of waking, denying him even the chance to beg or bargain for mercy. By the time Brant's blood cooled, Marcus had already vanished again, moving through thick night air toward the man whose cruelty carved the deepest wounds. Master Cohen kept guards who slept lightly and drank heavily, men who believed their status exempted them from being targets, never considering Marcus's patience outmatched their vigilance. He waited behind the storage shed until two guards argued over dice, slipping between their silhouettes once attention drifted, dissolving into darkness like breath on glass. Inside, Cohen wrote at his desk, pen scratching angrily about profits and punishments, unaware of the silent figure entering through the unsecured side passage. Marcus seized him with the precision of a man who'd rehearsed this movement for years, binding Cohen's wrists before the man could scream for help. This confrontation lasted longest, Cohen spitting rage behind the gag, eyes bulging at the realization that his own victim now wielded complete power. Marcus worked slowly, allowing Cohen to feel every second he once forced Marcus to endure, balancing justice with intention, making cruelty answerable at last. When silence reclaimed the room, Marcus stepped back into the night, knowing only one name remained: a man younger, sharper, crueler, the final thread in a decade-long snare. The youngest master, Darren, lived in the tallest house on the ridge, a structure built on ego more than lumber, standing like a monument to a man who believed himself untouchable. Marcus approached cautiously, studying the guards who circled the porch, men who laughed loudly and drank cheap whiskey, oblivious to the fact their shifts made them predictable. He memorized each rotation, noting the exact moment when two guards turned corners simultaneously, leaving a narrow gap in their sight lines wide enough for a determined man to slip through. When the gap opened, Marcus moved, low and swift, disappearing beneath the wooden steps, crouching in cool darkness that hid him as completely as if the earth swallowed him whole. Darren's voice drifted from the open window above, sharp and arrogant, barking orders to no one, pacing as though the walls themselves respected his authority. Marcus waited for him to settle, hearing footsteps slow, hearing the clink of a glass placed down, hearing the sigh of a man relaxing into dangerous comfort. With a quiet rise, Marcus made his way to the side entrance, the same door Darren always forgot to lock, trusting guards more than caution, trusting fear more than reason. Inside, the hallway smelled of cigar smoke and polished wood, a reminder of nights Marcus had cleaned these floors while Darren delivered lectures about obedience and genetic inferiority. Marcus pressed forward, letting his breath steady, letting silence wrap around him until he reached the study door where Darren now sat with his back facing the entrance. The blade's reflection wavered in lamplight as Marcus stepped forward, catching Darren's attention at the last second, turning the man's confidence into a startled gasp. Darren reached for a drawer he believed held protection, unaware Marcus had removed the pistol during earlier routines, planning this night long before anyone suspected him. When Darren spun around, Marcus already had rope in hand, movements practiced and unhurried, binding the master with a calm efficiency learned from years of silent resistance. The struggle was fierce but brief, Darren shouting threats that no longer carried weight, promises of punishment that dissolved into air as Marcus tightened each knot. Marcus listened without expression, letting the man's fear fill the room like smoke, a cloud that choked arrogance and replaced it with the terror of someone finally outmatched. Darren begged through the gag, wide eyes searching for mercy he never offered. Not once, in all the years Marcus was forced to kneel under his commands. Marcus delivered judgment with deliberate steadiness, not fast, not slow, showing Darren the same patience he once used to prolong another man's suffering for amusement. By the time the final breath left Darren, the house had fallen silent except for the faint rustle of trees outside, as though nature itself witnessed the reckoning. Marcus slipped out the back door, moving like a shadow sliding across moonlit ground, disappearing before guards noticed the shift in stillness above them. The ridge carried the faintest breeze, cooling sweat on Marcus's neck, grounding him in the reality that all 5 men once giants in his nightmares had fallen. He crossed the fields using back paths known only to enslaved men who memorized every inch of land to avoid the overseer's wrath, trusting instincts sharpened by survival. At the quarters, lanterns flickered as whispers spread faster than footsteps. Men glanced his way, sensing something colossal shifting beneath the surface of normalcy. Marcus walked past them with steady shoulders, neither triumphant nor shaken, just a man who had done what needed doing, carrying the weight with unsettling calm. He reached his cabin, its door creaking lightly when pushed, welcoming him into the familiar darkness where solitude steadied his emotions like a steadying hand on the shoulder. His breath came slow as he set the blade beneath loose floorboards, hiding it beneath layers of dust and dirt, sealing away the instrument that remade his world. Outside, distant voices carried through the warm air, guards shouting, feet pounding, panic creeping like thick fog now that the youngest master had gone silent. Marcus watched through a crack in the wall as torches flared, creating frantic patterns of light, men searching corners with fear for the first time in their lives. He remained perfectly still, letting the chaos outside pass over him like a storm, trusting the night to shield him, trusting his own planning enough to wait quietly. In the hours that followed, whistles blew and dogs barked, but none came to his door, none considered the man who worked hardest and spoke least. He lay down without closing his eyes, listening to the rising panic that signaled how thoroughly power could crumble when one man refused to bend anymore. The first hint of dawn crept across the horizon, the sky bruised with purple and gray, as Marcus prepared himself for the storm of interrogations that always followed death. He rose from his cot command and hurried, washing his hands in cold water, ready to face the coming questions with the steady composure of a man who had nothing left to fear. The sun crawled over the plantation with a weak, bruised light as Marcus stood outside the interrogation shed, breathing slowly, accepting that the world he knew had cracked but not yet collapsed. Guards circled like angry hornets, their voices sharp, demanding explanations from every man they pulled aside, each officer more terrified than authoritative as they realized control was slipping. Marcus stepped into the room when summoned, meeting the sheriff's stare with eyes calm enough to unsettle men accustomed to flinching compliance from those forced beneath them. Questions slammed against him like thrown stones, but he answered each with measured stillness, offering nothing unusual, letting silence speak the truth they didn't want to acknowledge. The sheriff paced before him, boots scraping rough wood, muttering that no enslaved man could execute 5 masters with precision unless guided by outside forces or a natural cunning. Marcus watched quietly, knowing the sheriff's fear stemmed from imagining how many more men like him existed, walking silently past suspicion, hiding strength behind necessity. When released, he rejoined the others, their eyes tracing him with unspoken recognition, sensing something holy or dangerous in the way he moved through the morning. Rumors flowed faster than water, carried by trembling lips, talk of shadows moving with purpose, talk of justice delivered by invisible hands, talk of one man defying everything. By midday, the plantation owners gathered in the hall, demanding answers, each blaming the others, each trembling behind expensive coats stitched from stolen labor. Their panic cracked the air, turning polished floors into a stage where fear performed without dignity, revealing how fragile powerful men became when confronted by invisible threats. Marcus observed from a distance, sweeping the steps as ordered, blending into the scenery, while hearing every desperate whisper that exposed weaknesses deeper than the murders themselves. By evening, the hall filled again, this time with deputies hunting for evidence that didn't exist, overturning tables, searching pockets of air, missing the truth in plain sight. Marcus understood then that his actions were no longer his alone. They had transformed into a legend whispered through the cabins with reverence and trembling awe. As night settled, men from the quarters gathered quietly, standing near Marcus with respect, sensing a shift in the universe around them, something reshaping fear into possibility. They spoke in low tones, honoring the fallen masters with no grief, sharing memories of pain that now felt lighter because someone had struck back without hesitation. Marcus didn't claim the deed, didn't lift himself above them, but his silence alone became a confirmation, a quiet crown placed upon a man who refused to bow. The sheriff returned the next morning with a posse twice as large, determined to break someone, to force a confession, to restore a hierarchy that now trembled on cracked legs. They stormed the cabins, dragging men into dirt, shouting questions, demanding betrayal, but each man held firm, bound by a loyalty born from shared suffering and newfound pride. Marcus endured a second interrogation, harsher than the first, fists and threats thrown like weapons, but he stood straighter each time, unbroken by voices used to obedience. When they failed again, the sheriff turned to the owners, suggesting collective punishment, but panic grew. Too many men were needed for harvest, too many profits at stake. Owners cursed the sheriff, cursed the situation, cursed the idea that one enslaved man could unmake 5 masters while slipping through every trap laid to catch him. By the third day, weariness filled the estate, guards sleeping in chairs, overseers trembling at shadows, convinced revenge stalked them to with patient, unseen steps. Marcus watched them crumble, seeing justice continue long after blades were sheathed, realizing fear left deeper marks than steel, reshaping the land more permanently than violence alone. The quarters buzzed with a new energy, men walking taller, straightening their backs, recognizing possibility in themselves because one among them had walked into fire and remained. Some whispered ideas of escape, some of rebellion, some of endurance strengthened by hope, each inspired by the realization that oppressors were not invincible titans after all. Marcus kept to himself, repairing fences, stacking firewood, performing daily tasks with the same measured quiet that once hid his intentions and now hid his victory. But inside, he felt a calm heavier than exhaustion, a stillness built from the knowledge he had paid a decade-old debt carved into his bones. On the 5th night, storms rolled overhead, thunder shaking loose memories of the men he eliminated, their faces flickering in lightning like ghosts witnessing their own undoing. Marcus stood beneath the rain, letting it wash through him, cleansing the blood history carried, finding peace in knowing he answered cruelty without losing himself entirely. When dawn broke again, the plantation still searched for its invisible reaper, never imagining he stood among them, shoulders steady, gaze forward, ready for whatever future rose next.